I became a single dad at 27. I did not become a single father in some dramatic, explosive way. There was no screaming match or police lights. No slamming doors that rattled the windows. It was quieter than that, and somehow that made it worse. Lauren left on a Tuesday afternoon. Our daughter Emma was just 8 months old. I remember because she had started sitting up on her own the week before, and I had been so proud I sent videos to everyone in my contacts. I thought we were tired but stable. I thought that was what new parenthood looked like. Lauren told me. She felt like she was disappearing. She said she was not meant to be someone's mother full-time. She said she needed to find herself, which sounded like something people say before booking a one-way flight. I stood there holding a baby monitor while she packed. She did not fight for custody. She told me I was a good father and Emma would be better off with me. That sentence should have felt like a compliment. Instead, it felt like someone handing me a responsibility too heavy to carry and walking away before I could say no. I remember the sound of the front door closing. I remember Emma waking up from her nap and crying, confused by the sudden shift in the house. I remember standing in the hallway thinking, this cannot be real. The first few months alone felt like trying to swim with weights strapped to my ankles. I worked full-time in its support, mostly remote, but with occasional on-site days. I had some savings, but daycare costs were brutal. My parents lived 3 states away. Lauren's family did not reach out. It was just me and Emma. In our small apartment, people love to say fathers are heroes for doing the bare minimum. I learnt that quickly. When I took Emma to the grocery store, older women would smile at me like I deserved a medal for pushing a cart and reading ingredient labels. When I brought her to pediatric appointments, the nurses would ask, "Where's Mum?" in a tone that assumed temporary absence. When I said, "It's just me," there would be that brief pause. I did not need applause. I needed sleep. Emma did not care that I had been up late finishing a server migration. She did not care that I had a morning meeting. At 2:31 a.m., she cared about being held. At 4:03 a.m., she cared about a bottle. At 5:45 a.m., she decided the day had begun. There were nights. I sat on the couch with her sleeping on my chest while the television played on mute. I would stare at the wall and feel 2 things at once: overwhelming love and bone-deep fear. What if I messed her up? I worried about things I never worried about before. Was she hitting milestones on time? Was I stimulating her brain enough? Did she need more social interaction? Was I talking to her enough during the day? I narrated everything like a podcast host just to fill the silence. This is a spoon, Emma. Spoon. We use it for yogurt. I was terrified that my exhaustion would turn into impatience. I promised myself I would never let her feel like a burden. Financially, it was tight but manageable. Emotionally, it was a different story. The real struggle did not begin until Emma turned 3. That was when Lauren came back. Not physically, but legally. She sent an email first. Casual, like she had been on a long vacation instead of absent for over 2 years. She said she had done a lot of work. She said she missed Emma and she wanted to establish visitation. I stared at the email for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part of me knew I could not. I never hated Lauren. That would have been easier. Instead, I felt something more complicated. I felt protective. I had been there for every fever, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. Emma did not remember her mother. To her, Mummy was a word from books. Lauren moved back to our city within 2 months. She rented an apartment 15 minutes away and filed for shared custody. That was when the real battle began. On paper, it looked simple. 2 parents, 1 child. Shared responsibility. In reality, it felt like someone trying to insert themselves into a story they had not been there to. Emma was shy around Lauren at first. She clung to my leg during the first supervised visit. Lauren cried, which made Emma cry, which made the whole thing feel like a disaster. But kids are adaptable. Within a few weeks, Emma warmed up. She started coming home from visits with small toys and new phrases. She began saying things like, "Mummy says I can have candy before dinner," or "Mummy says you're too strict." It started small. Lauren questioned my routines. She said I was too rigid about bedtime and I hovered too much. I tried to communicate calmly. I suggested we align on rules for consistency. Lauren would agree in text and then ignore it in practice. The courts granted us 50-50 custody within 6 months. I told myself this was fair. I told myself Emma deserved both parents. But what no one prepares you for is how hard it is to share your child with someone who walked away once before. The first night, Emma stayed at Lauren's apartment without supervision. I did not sleep. I checked my phone every hour. I imagined worst-case scenarios. I hated that. I felt powerless. Over time, the conflict shifted from emotional to strategic. Lauren began portraying me as controlling. She told mutual acquaintances that I had pushed her out during postpartum depression. She suggested I had been distant and unsupportive. The narrative spread quietly. Suddenly, I was not the devoted single dad. I was the rigid, overly structured father who made motherhood unbearable. The most frustrating part was that there was no dramatic accusation to refute. Just implication. Emma started preschool that fall. During pickup, one afternoon, another parent asked gently if everything was okay at home. The tone told me enough. I realized then that this was no longer just about co-parenting, it was about control of perception. I focused on Emma. I kept our routines steady. I packed her lunches. With notes inside, I showed up early to every school event and learned how to braid hair from YouTube tutorials. I became both structure and softness. But the tension simmered and it was building towards something I did not see coming. The first time I realized this could spiral out of control was during a parent-teacher conference. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patel, sat across from me with a careful expression. She complimented Emma's reading skills and praised her kindness. Then she cleared her throat. "There have been some comments," she said gently. Emma mentioned feeling nervous at home. My stomach dropped. "At my home?" I asked. "She did not specify," Mrs. Patel said. "She just said she feels like she has to be very good." I knew immediately what this was. Lauren had been telling Emma that I was strict and I expected perfection. At my house, bedtime was 8, vegetables were non-negotiable, and homework was done before television. It was not extreme, it was stable. But compared to Lauren's free-flowing, anything-goes weekends, I was the bad guy. When I picked Emma up that evening, I asked her gently if she felt nervous with me. She shrugged and said, sometimes she did not want to disappoint Daddy. That sentence stayed with me all night. I began second-guessing everything. Was I too structured? Too intense? Was my fear of instability turning me into something rigid? Lauren escalated things a month later. She requested a modification to custody. Her claim was that Emma needed a primary residence for emotional consistency, and that her apartment was a more nurturing environment. She cited Emma's statements at school. I felt blindsided. There had been no conversation about concerns. Just paperwork. I hired a lawyer with money I did not really have. The retainer alone wiped out half my emergency savings. Lauren painted a picture of me that barely resembled reality. She described me as controlling and implied I monitored Emma excessively. She framed my routines as oppressive. The most frustrating part was how ordinary my parenting was. There was nothing dramatic to defend against, just a narrative that made discipline sound cruel. The stress started leaking into every part of my life. I struggled to focus at work. I snapped at a coworker during a meeting. I forgot to switch laundry and had to send Emma to school in mismatched socks. I hated that this was affecting her. Lauren, meanwhile, seemed energized. She volunteered at Emma's school during her custody weeks and baked cupcakes for class parties. I do not think she did it maliciously at first. I think she genuinely believed she was correcting a story in which she had been absent. But the way she did it felt like erasing me. The court ordered a custody evaluation. A stranger began interviewing us separately, observing Emma in both homes and asking invasive questions about discipline, mental health, and daily routines. I felt like I was on trial for loving my daughter too carefully. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table, long after Emma had fallen asleep, staring at spreadsheets of expenses and legal fees. I calculated worst-case scenarios. If I lost primary custody, I would still fight for 50-50. If that failed, I would move closer to Lauren's apartment. I would rearrange my entire life. The thought of seeing Emma less than half the week felt like suffocation. One afternoon, Emma came home from Lauren's with a new tablet. She said, "It's just for me," Emma explained. We had agreed months earlier to limit screen time and not introduce personal devices yet. Lauren had nodded during mediation. I did not confront her angrily. I simply reiterated our agreement in writing. She responded that I was obsessed with control. Every disagreement turned into proof of my supposed rigidity. The evaluation lasted 3 months. 3 months of pretending everything was fine while living in suspended anxiety. I tried to stay steady for Emma. I never spoke negatively about her mother in front of her. I bit my tongue until it almost bled. The evaluation report was scheduled to be submitted in 2 weeks, and then something happened that shifted everything. Emma's preschool called again. This time, it was not vague. They said Emma had drawn a picture during free time. In the drawing, there were 2 houses. In one house, there was a small figure standing alone in a corner. Above it, she had scribbled the word "scared." Dad was written next to that house. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I drove straight to Lauren's apartment after picking Emma up early. I did not yell. I did not accuse. I asked calmly if she had been telling Emma that I was harsh or angry. Lauren denied it. She said children misinterpret things. She suggested maybe my tone intimidated Emma. I went home and sat on the edge of Emma's bed after she fell asleep. I looked at her small hands curled under her chin and wondered how this had become our reality. I knew one thing with certainty. I had never raised my voice in anger at her. I had never used fear as discipline. If anything, I overcompensated toward gentleness. So where was this coming from? Emma did not feel scared of me. She felt scared of disappointing her mother. And if she could frame that fear as being about me, she would not have to confront it directly. The custody evaluation report arrived on a gray Thursday morning. I did not open it right away. I let the email sit in my inbox for almost an hour while I made Emma breakfast and braided her hair for preschool. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were racing. This document felt like a verdict on my entire existence as a father. When I finally opened it, I read every word slowly. The evaluator described me as consistent, attentive, and emotionally responsive. She noted that Emma demonstrated strong attachment in my home. She described Loren as warm and enthusiastic, but inconsistent with boundaries. She acknowledged tension between households and warned that continued conflict would negatively impact Emma's emotional stability. Then I reached the recommendation. The evaluator advised maintaining 50-50 custody, with a structured parenting plan that required both households to follow consistent guidelines around bedtime, discipline, and screen time. It was not a total victory, but it was not the loss Lauren had been pushing for. For the first time in months, I exhaled. Lauren did not take it well. She framed the report as biased. She claimed the evaluator had spent more time observing Emma with me. She implied I had somehow manipulated the process by being overprepared. The irony was almost exhausting. I had simply lived my normal life under observation. The court adopted the evaluator's recommendations. For a brief moment, I believed the worst was behind us. But Lauren shifted tactics. If she could not win through the courts, she would win through influence. She became hyper-visible in Emma's world. She volunteered for every school event during her custody weeks. She joined the Parent Association. She organized playdates. She positioned herself as the fun, flexible parent, while subtly reinforcing that my house was the serious one. Emma began testing boundaries more aggressively. Bedtime became a negotiation and homework turned into tears. She started comparing. Everything, Mummy lets me. I held firm, but inside, I felt worn down. Every limit I set felt like another brick in a wall Lauren was building between us. Then one evening, Emma asked me something that stopped me cold. Daddy, why don't you smile as much as Mummy? It was such a simple question. Not accusatory. Just curious. I realized then that Lauren's strategy was not to paint me as cruel anymore. It was to paint me as serious. I began paying attention to my own face. I noticed how often I carried tension in my jaw and how often I was thinking 3 steps ahead instead of being fully present. I had been fighting so hard to be stable that I had forgotten to be light. Over the next few weeks, I made small changes. I kept our structure, but I softened around the edges. I built pillow forts. I let bedtime stretch 15 minutes on Fridays. And I started Saturday morning pancake traditions. Not as competition, but as connection. Lauren escalated again when she realized the emotional shift was not going in her favor. She filed a complaint, alleging I was emotionally pressuring Emma to prefer my home. The claim was vague, but serious enough to require follow-up interviews. I felt something in me crack, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I was exhausted from defending against shadows. The follow-up interviews concluded quickly. There was no evidence of manipulation and the complaint was dismissed. But the damage was cumulative. The conflict was not about parenting style anymore. It was about identity, and Emma was standing in the middle of it. The breaking point came during Emma's first grade spring performance. It was a small school auditorium filled with folding chairs and proud parents holding up phones. I arrived early, as usual. I saved a seat beside me for Lauren, because regardless of everything, I believed Emma deserved to see us sitting together. Lauren arrived late and sat 2 rows behind me instead. When Emma walked onto the stage, she scanned the room nervously. Her eyes found me first. I smiled and gave her a thumbs up. Then she looked past me and found Lauren. I watched her face change. Not in fear, in pressure. The performance went smoothly, but afterward, Emma clung to both of us in turns, almost frantically seeking approval. That night, during my custody week, she had a meltdown over a minor homework correction. She cried harder than the situation warranted. Through tears, she said she did not want to make either of us upset. That was the moment everything crystallized. This was not about bedtime rules, or cupcakes, or tablets. Emma felt responsible for managing our emotional equilibrium. She was 6 years old. I realized that as long as Lauren and I existed in quiet competition, Emma would keep splitting herself in half. I could not control Lauren's behavior, but I could control mine. I stopped engaging in reactive communication. I kept messages short, factual, and neutral. I stopped defending every minor accusation. I trusted that consistency over time would speak louder than rebuttals. More importantly, I shifted how I showed up with Emma. I told her, calmly and clearly, that she did not have to choose sides. That loving mummy did not hurt daddy. That making mistakes did not disappoint me. That my love for her did not depend on performance. I did not say it once. I said it often. I started asking her open-ended questions about her feelings instead of correcting behavior immediately. I praised effort instead of outcome, and I let small imperfections pass. The transformation was gradual, but noticeable. Lauren's attempts to provoke conflict lost momentum when I stopped participating. Without resistance, her accusations had nothing to push against. Over time, the community perception stabilized. Teachers saw consistency, and other parents saw reliability. The narrative Lauren had tried to shape quietly dissolved under the weight of observable reality. The final court review, scheduled a year after the initial evaluation, was brief. There were no new complaints and no new allegations. Just documentation of a stable co-parenting schedule and a child performing well academically and emotionally. The judge maintained the existing custody arrangement. But the real victory had happened long before that ruling. It happened the night Emma crawled into my lap after dinner and said, completely unprompted, that she liked having two homes because it meant she got double love. There was no fear in her voice, just certainty. Lauren never apologized. She never acknowledged the strain she caused. But she stopped trying to rewrite the story, and I stopped trying to win it. I am still a single dad. I still worry, and I still get tired. I still question myself more than I probably should, but I no longer feel like I am fighting for emotional territory. I am simply raising my daughter. For almost 2 years, I had been operating in defense mode. Every email notification had tightened my chest. Every school update had felt like potential evidence. Every shift in Emma's mood had sent me spiraling into analysis. When that constant tension began to fade, I did not trust it. The absence of chaos felt louder than the chaos itself. Emma was 7 when I first noticed a deeper change. It was not in her behavior, but in her posture. She no longer scanned our faces for emotional cues before speaking. She no longer small requests with cautious explanations. She simply existed. One evening during my custody week, we were making spaghetti together. She spilled a small cup of shredded cheese across the counter and froze, bracing for a reaction that did not come. I handed her a towel and smiled. She relaxed instantly and started giggling at the mess. I realized how long she had been holding tension in her tiny body. As the months passed, I focused less on reacting to Lauren and more on building something steady and predictable in my own home. I advanced at work and moved us into a slightly larger townhouse with a small backyard. Nothing extravagant, just enough space for a swing set and a garden box where Emma insisted on planting strawberries. Lauren's presence in Emma's life also stabilized, though in a different way. The intensity faded, and the need to prove herself seemed to soften as she built her own routine. She kept volunteering occasionally, but it no longer felt like a campaign. It felt ordinary. We were never close again. We were never friends. But we reached something resembling functional distance. The real test came unexpectedly. Emma had a rough week at school after a falling out with a friend. She came home withdrawn and unusually quiet. Later that night, she told me she felt like her friend was choosing someone else over her. The words hit me harder than she knew. It was such a small childhood conflict, but I heard echoes of our own situation. I saw how easily children internalize comparison and competition. Instead of fixing it, I listened. I told her that friendships shift and change, and that it does not mean she is less valuable. I told her that sometimes people move in different directions, but that does not erase what came before. As I said it, I realized I was speaking to myself as much as to her. Lauren had left. She had come back. She had tried to reshape the story. But none of it erased the years I carried Emma alone. None of it erased the nights I sat upright in the dark with a baby asleep on my chest. That history was ours. The final shift happened. During a school essay assignment, Emma was asked to write about someone she admired. I did not know about the assignment until she brought the paper home. She handed it to me casually, already running off to play. I sat at the kitchen table and read it slowly. She wrote about me. She did not mention custody. She did not mention conflict. She did not frame me as a hero. She wrote about pancakes on Saturdays, about learning to ride her bike in the cul-de-sac, and about how I always checked under her bed for imaginary monsters, even though we both knew there were none. She wrote that I stay the same, even when things are hard. I folded that paper carefully and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Life is not perfect. Co-parenting is never effortless when the foundation was fractured. There are still minor disagreements. There are still moments of tension. But the emotional battlefield that once defined our days is gone. Lauren eventually stopped trying to redefine me because there was nothing left to push against. Teachers saw involvement, and doctors saw follow-through. Emma saw stability. The truth did not need volume. It needed endurance. During a school open house, Emma guided both Lauren and me through her classroom. She spoke confidently, explaining her projects and pointing out artwork on the walls. At one point, she reached back without looking and grabbed both of our hands. We stood there, side by side, not touching, but connected through her. There was no tension in her shoulders. She was not managing us. She was simply proud. Later that evening, as I tucked her into bed, she asked if I ever get tired being a dad all by myself sometimes. I told her the truth. Yes, I get tired. Yes, I get tired. Yes. It is hard. Yes, there were days when I felt afraid I was not enough. But I also told her that being her dad has never once felt like a burden. After she fell asleep, I sat in the hallway for a while, listening to the quiet hum of the house. I thought back to that Tuesday afternoon when Lauren walked out the door and I stood there holding a baby monitor in disbelief. If I could go back and speak to that version of myself, I would not tell him it would be easy. I would tell him that the hardest part would not be diapers or daycare or court hearings. The hardest part would be staying soft when it would be easier to harden. The hardest part would be refusing to compete when invited to battle. The hardest part would be trusting that steadiness, over time, would matter more than spectacle. I'm still a single dad. I still make mistakes. I still second guess. I still wake up sometimes at 2 a.m., out of habit, even though Emma sleeps through the night now. But I no longer feel like I am fighting for my place in her life. I earned it. In the quiet, and that has been more than enough.